So hello to everyone that's online as well. I think there's a few participants there. But you'll have to forgive me. I like to be roaming around, so I feel a little bit in a cage here, but just bear with me as we go through the presentation. I always feel privileged to come back to UQ as being a student here in my undergraduate and more recently with PhD. So it's really lovely to come back and share some of the results of the research that we've been doing. I feel quite happy to do that. And hopefully you'll get maybe some ideas or two out of maybe the scale development side of things, so more of a technical learning for today. Or if you're interested in health and safety, maybe this could inspire you to go forth and conquer the health and safety space, who knows. I just wanted to give a nod to my collaborators. So obviously Kirsten's here today, so thanks Kirsten for your help on this project. But also working with Narina at QT and Mark at Curtin as well. So this particular project's been quite a monster. We've been doing work with the Office of Industrial Relations at the Queensland Government now for over a year. And that particular project has now evolved into an ARC linkage application. So this shows that when you do partner with industry, it can turn into amazing things and potentially future research grants. So I have been talking to some of your colleagues this morning about if you do ever want to link in with various industry players, let me know, because I'm happy to do that for either your PhD projects or if you're thinking about a career in research, let me know. Happy to share that. But let's get on with the show, hey, and start to talk about the actual project here. Sorry, guys, just got to click back on that. So I guess who here has been impacted by COVID? I think we can all probably say yes in some form or another. We've been impacted by the particular pandemic that we've all been sort of struggling to deal with over the past nearly 2 years now. But when it comes to health and safety, it obviously has had an impact there as well. And I'm sure if I asked you, are you more mindful of your health and safety, we'd probably see the same hands go up as well, that we are now mindful of how close we are to people, our impact on others, hygiene and health as well. Fortunately, with other research that I've been doing with colleagues at QT and a private consultant, we've been fortunate to discover just how deep the COVID impact has been across industry in Australia. We've been following about 25 to 30 safety managers over the past couple of years and interviewing them periodically. And it's been fascinating to see how organisations have coped with the pandemic. On the one hand, some safety managers have been completely empowered and really part of the decision-making about how to create resilience in those organisations. And unfortunately, in about a quarter of those other organisations, safety managers and health and safety itself seems to have become a bit marginalised. They've been pushed away in favour of more of the financial concerns of business leaders, trying to, that sort of goal of keeping the organisation afloat. Some of the themes that emerged from that particular qualitative study you can see up here. Unfortunately, in some organisations, resources have been taken away from health and safety and put into, maybe more production capability or the ability to sort of keep the organisation functioning effectively when they're operating with reduced income. Some safety managers have felt as though they've been pushed to the side and not really part of the crisis management team or involved in that decision-making at a senior management level. So they've really missed an opportunity to consult and involve experts, risk practitioners in their decision-making. And of course, the uncertainty equation. COVID has created a lot of insecurity for people with their jobs. Safety managers have struggled to cope with the amount of information and sometimes conflicting requirements that governments have placed on them. So all in all, it's what we call a bit of a pressure cooker situation. We've got scarcity of resources, we've got multiple competing perspectives from different stakeholders, and the net result is, well, safety might actually be compromised, paradoxically, in this time where we should be really emphasising the safety of our people and our employees. So it's a very interesting time to study the effect of the pandemic on safety. If we zoom out a little bit and start to look at megatrends with health and safety, this is another paper we published last year with Mark and my colleague Xiaowen at QT. There's various megatrends that are sort of changing the landscape of health and safety and really encouraging us to challenge the way that we think about and define health and safety into the future. So I'll just quickly go through some of these challenges now. The first is really that idea of how we structure our workforce and how, the types of employees that we engage with. So many organisations are starting to capitalise on the gig economy and more contract or contingent workforces. And what that suggests for health and safety is it really challenges the notion of a safety culture. how can you have a shared organisational environment if everyone's distributed and sort of, quite disparate in their views, perhaps, about health and safety? We see the introduction of the tension between to decentralise or centralise, and how organisations manage that tension might have a really strong impact on their health and safety performance. The second one is technology. So as we become more technologically advanced and savvy, organisations seek to capitalise on that technology. And again, we see a tension emerge, the tension between automating and maybe even replacing or removing humans from the production line versus more of an augmentation and sort of helping humans to be better at what they do. And so organisations might trade off one of those options against the other and go down a certain path. But again, if we automate, does that make the organisation more complex and really cause some issues for the employees in managing safety, because they don't understand what the system's doing or what the engine under the hood is actually performing? So it's quite a complex situation to manage safety. Other things like collecting data. So as health and safety and organisations become better at collecting more and more raw information, they have the tension between having data on the one hand, the data points, the raw kind of unanalyzed stuff, versus the more informative, analysed and interpreted information that helps to drive decision making. And so paradoxically, as we collect more data, if we don't innovate the way that we analyse that, we'll actually have less information to manage health and safety. We've just got this plethora and feeling overwhelmed with the amount of data that's coming at us. And lastly, compliance is on the rise. A recent Deloitte report, well, a few years ago now, showed that over $250 billion is spent on compliance requirements in private industry in Australia, and half of that, more than half, is due to self-imposed compliance. And so again, the tension comes for safety. Do we manage compliance, or do we give people flexibility to adapt and be able to cope with surprises and things that we haven't necessarily embedded in our procedures? So a whole host of things happening there. Oops, wrong computer. And if we zoom out even further and say, well, there's actually a challenge about what safety actually means in industry. And some of you may have heard of the movement called Safety Differently, or Safety 1 versus Safety 2. This is something that's really challenging the underlying philosophy of what safety is all about. On the one hand, the Safety 1 is based on the premise that we seek to reduce negative events as much as possible. We want to reduce the bad things that happen and really focus reactively on learning and sort of improving as accidents and incidents happen. And Safety 2 is, I guess, looking at it from the other side of the coin to say, well, safety is also about positive capability and capacity. How do we create healthy, supportive and interesting, effective cultures that drive health and safety behaviour? How do we instill leadership capabilities and the ability to be resilient in our organisations? So we're really, I guess, at an interesting point when it comes to the science and the philosophy of health and safety itself. There's a lot happening and a lot of change that's underway. So really we come to the key premise of our project and the idea that there's innovative new ways are needed to start to measure and manage health and safety itself, because the methods that we've used over the past 100, 150 years, they're all steeped in Tayloristic sort of scientific management principles. Basically that we need to constrain performance, we need to create rules and procedures and policies, and we need to make sure that the deviations from that ideal way of doing things is minimised as much as possible. And of course, in that complex, messy, wicked kind of environment that I described before, these tensions and paradoxes and issues, that quickly runs out of steam. We need people to be flexible, to be able to adapt, to improvise, to use their human capacities and their expertise to actually stop the bad stuff from happening and create safety, the positive capability to be safe in those high-risk environments. So I guess it's trying to build an argument that we needed to do something here, and hence the solution, I guess, well, I hope, is the project that we're going to talk about today. So I wanted to talk to you about safety capability, which is this idea that we're trying to flesh out and give some more definition to through the work that Tristan and I and the other collaborators are doing. So what is safety capability? What does this thing all about? Well, it's the ability, so it's sort of like a potential of an organisation to exhibit some sort of performance, so to be safe or to be successful. And it's tied to the environment in which we work. So in conditions of uncertainty and complexity, so it's really designed to mitigate some of those challenges we talked about at the start of the presentation. And also under conditions where we're working collaboratively, we've got interdependence between different teams or different work units. So it's trying to take health and safety into a more positive space, and while leveraging some of the stuff we already do quite well in that prevention kind of idea, but augment that and extend that into, developing, I guess, skills, knowledge, systems, processes that enable organisations to adapt and cope with the uncertainty and the complexity of the modern world. And that was derived from Mark Griffin's work in 2014. Now, this project has taken that early idea about safety capability and that initial definition and started to unpack it a little bit more and give some more theoretical scaffolding to what this safety capability idea is all about. And what we've come up with is this three-dimension conceptualization of safety capability. So we're saying that if you break it down, the ability to be safe in these high-risk settings is comprised of energy, proficiency, and agility. Now, energy is all about the potential of the organisation to really maintain a priority and a commitment to safety when it matters most. And that's when there's those competing goals or tensions that I talked about earlier. So if you think about the science of safety climate, that's kind of where we're coming from. It's this sort of broader understanding that, when things are in competition with each other, when productivity is maybe challenged by, or safety is challenged by productivity, that's when the organisation really needs to flex its capability muscle and start to make sure that decisions are prioritising safety in that situation. Proficiency, so coordinating and deploying resources to reduce risk. And that's really about our capacity of the organisation to be effective at utilising risk management strategies. So does it engage people in this sort of, a helpful way of looking at procedures and design them really effectively to match the work that's being done? And also having, I guess, an organisational context where there's good coordination, communication, and we're making sure that operations are happening successfully. And lastly, agility. This is all about change and that notion of being flexible. So when things are changing or there's unexpected surprises, how does the organisation respond? And do they have the capability to flex and bend and be able to absorb that difference and basically maintain safety at the same time? So why would we introduce yet another concept? This health and safety is one of those spaces where there's so many different ideas and competing theories and models, and here we are with yet another one. I guess where it comes from is a lot of criticism around concepts like safety culture. So if you are familiar with that debate, you would realise or understand that safety culture it's poorly defined, and it's got a lot of issues in terms of measurement. What this has done is really impeded or put a brake on some of the academic developments in the field, I think, and created a lot of division in terms of different researchers looking at different conceptualizations of what safety culture is. Safety capability, on the other hand, is trying to integrate. It's trying to bring all these different ideas like leadership, climate, culture, safety management systems, human behaviour and performance, and put them into one framework. So we're all sort of talking the same language, and we're all using the same sorts of measures or investigative tools to understand what this thing's all about. So we're integrating multiple ideas about safety. We're also thinking about how safety is both the absence of negatives and the presence of positives, trying to bring two kind of disparate fields together. Safety capability is also quite practical because it's got a track record of being able to be measured and potentially changed as well. So it's got an industry flavour to it that would resonate with the people that will ultimately benefit from this particular concept. It also, unlike safety culture, has some clear theory about how intangibles like maybe perceptions of climate or underpinning beliefs and attitudes flow through to affect more tangible aspects in terms of safety performance. Safety culture is a bit of a black box. We sort of say things like, there's this shared value and commitment to safety and somehow that produces the outcomes. We don't really have a lot of evidence to say whether that relationship exists, but for safety capability, we've at least got a starting point that's quite theoretically sound. There's a bunch of measures out there that we already have, so it's got a good track record of being able to be measured, as I've said. And it sidesteps some of that endless debate and confusion that plagues the safety culture and, to some extent, the safety climate literature. So there's a few reasons why we wanted to go down that path. So now that we kind of understand a little bit more about what safety capability is, the next question is, well, how do we do something about it? You know, what do we actually build or create in an organisation to establish that property? So we look at, I guess, 3 different enabling capitals derived from the management literature. And the idea is that there's organisational, social and human capitals, things that organisations can tangibly mould and shape and invest in, that produces that emergent property of safety capability. So when it comes to the organisational capital, we're talking about things like the management systems, the policies and structures and way of doing things that are codified in the organisation. Social is all about leadership practices and the way that teams collaborate and work together. And human capital is the competencies, the knowledge and motivation and skills that our people have to, that can deploy those skills when the situation requires it. So all those capitals together kind of synergistically create safety capability. They sort of interact with each other and also individually contribute to that emergent property. Just a quick mention of how safety capability is practically meaningful for industry, and just a side note to say that particularly when dealing with government stakeholders, it's strategically good to try and align your project with what they've got in their strategy or what they're trying to achieve with their legislation. So I just wanted to flash this up to say that one of the engagement or one of the ways that we built the relationship with our industry partners is to demonstrate to them, well, how is this helping you to achieve your goals? It helps you to operationalise your regulatory strategy, which is set by Safe Work Australia, the big policy body that oversees strategy in Australia. It helps you to, or helps industry to achieve compliance with legislation, because we're giving them a tool and a vehicle to understand what they can tangibly do to improve and discharge their duties. And we're also helping the industry partners board or their advisory panel to achieve their strategic goals around safety culture and sort of improving the safety performance of industry. So a few little tips there around engaging with industry and aligning it with various strategies. So a little bit more detail now about the actual project. So there's really 2 phases to what we did over the past probably 12 to 18 months with our industry partner. Firstly, it was about developing and testing a new measure of safety capability. So the way that I guess the objective was to provide a new tool that the regulator could deploy and use with industry to help improve performance. And the second objective of our project was to create a bit of a comparative data set and set the foundations for future partnerships to build on that research and start to expand what we're doing with safety capability, which I think we both achieved both of those objectives with our project. Now, to talk about the approach, and maybe this will be interesting to sort of chart a process of developing a new measure and having quite a robust series of studies. We did 5 in total. A lot of them were, these studies in the middle were online panels, so being done through Prolific. If you haven't heard of that particular service, you can engage people to do surveys for you for a little fee. Before moving into more of an industry representative sample that again was done with a panel provider, but it was a special Australian company that specialises in creating that really representative group to look at. So stepping you through study 1, qualitative approach and an exploratory cross-sectional survey. So basically developing the new tool, engaging with stakeholders, both subject matter experts and industry, to understand what is this concept, weaving in the background literature to look at, well, how do we utilise what's already there, all those existing measures for safety, how do we kind of recategorise or realign them with the safety capability framework, and then test out what factors emerge if we bunch those items together into hypothesised sort of categories or dimensions. Let me move into a little bit of testing here, initial confirmatory factor analysis, so a 300-person sample to look at, what are the dimensions that came out of that, does it match our theory? Moving on to another cross-sectional survey and confirmatory analysis. Number 4 was really just looking at validity, so including some additional measures to test whether the measure is associated with what we expect it to be and also discriminates from others. And the last sample was a two-way matched sample. So we separated the MOSC, which is the measures of safety capability, from the performance or outcome variables to try and get a bit more rigor in what we were doing. So let's have a little look at some of the results now to highlight what we did. I thought it might be helpful just to quickly go through our scale development process. Just check that we're okay for time. Firstly, just looking at, well, basically the background research, literature review on safety culture, climate, leadership, and safety performance. So recognising the fact that there is a lot out there already developed around these particular topics, and trying to distill that information into something that could be used for the safety capability model. We reviewed, I think we had about 544 items across 25 different safety-related surveys or tools, and we refined that down into an initial set of about 70 measures of safety capability items that we could test out. So, yeah, basically using that literature to extract the items, categorising them into dimensions, and then engaging with some colleagues here, in fact, from UQ, and also some other subject matter experts to do some focus groups and sorting tasks to make sure that we had some content validity to this particular measure from the start. So aligning those items with the hypothesised dimensions, checking for agreement, refining them down, and coming through to the next phase, which was engaging with industry to basically check that we hadn't missed anything. Okay? So a lot of different data sources integrated to build the tool. We had the background literature, we had our consultation with industry experts, and also, I guess, our own expertise as safety scientists, massaging and adding items to that particular tool. Coming back to basically come in and sort of pre-test the items, review them, testing through exploratory factor analysis, and then finally refining, creating a smaller, more robust and perhaps more nimble scale that could be used elsewhere in other organisational settings, because industry, let's face it, they don't like long surveys. So one of our success factors was to try and produce something that was still robust, but obviously much quicker for people to complete. So pretty comprehensive process there. Wanted to highlight a couple of interesting, I guess, best practice ideas that Kirsten and Marina and Mark helpfully brought my awareness to. The first is what we call Y-factor analysis. So it's a confirmatory technique where you're basically loading all of your items onto the hypothesized dimensions and simultaneously onto a single factor as well. And the reason you're doing that is because you can run various analyses and tests to say, well, is this measure best represented by one unified dimension, or is it better to score it as a series of dimensions and sort of differentiate the scores across multiple areas? So really helpful analysis just to take your scale development to the next level and really help you to understand, well, how do we analyse and interpret the data? You know, how do we score it, and how do we communicate the results to the industry? Cortina, a recent article just last year, talked about the limitations of convex alpha. So we recognised that and started to use the Amiga indice as well, which again is a bit of a more robust way of looking at scale reliability and accounts for the dimensionality of your measure. So again, that's another way just to take the scale development to the next level and start to be a little bit more sophisticated in your psychometric evaluation. We used a couple of techniques. So the Stanton article, which is a really great sort of foundational article from many years ago now, as well as Cortina's recommendations to reduce the scale down to 27 items. And if you check out that resource, I'll provide the slides after, a really handy R app, which you can plug in the various factor loadings, the correlations with the criterion, and other, maybe some reliability indices. And it recommends which items you should be extracting for your short form version of your scale. So really handy and obviously quite robust, and it's got a citation behind it too. So I recommend you check that out if you need to. And one of the steps that scale developers sometimes forget about is looking at content validity and doing that in a robust way. The way that we calculated that for our project is we had independent judges basically categorising the individual items into their respective dimensions, calculate the agreement, and then we can have a statistical representation of, well, how closely did people agree on that particular categorisation, and hence gives us some confidence that the items are actually measuring, what we intend them to measure, or they're sort of in the right ballpark. So just a few tips and tricks there for people that might be developing a scale or interested in evaluating a scale. But you're probably wondering, what does this measure look like? And I've been talking pretty high level up till now, but this is I guess, a representation of the 9 dimensions that make up the safety capability measure. So on this side, we've got the enabling capitals. Remember, the human, the social, and the systems, or the organizational capital. And across the top, we've got our energy, our proficiency, and our agility. So that combination of the 3 by 3, if you multiply that out, you basically get 9 dimensions that are measured by the measure, or by the tool. So going down, I guess, firstly, our energy dimension of safety capability, we've got the commitment of management in terms of prioritisation, and really derived from the safety climate literature. That was our main inspiration for that particular dimension. Support the safety in terms of supervisors, managers, and co-workers, so sort of instrumental help to achieve work safely, and that people feel as though they are adequately supported in their work. And the human capital component of energy is about, I guess, quite similar to Andrew Neil and Mark Griffin's work on safety participation. So this idea that we do a bit more, we're proactive, we're getting involved in supporting the safety initiatives. Going through the next one, which is proficiency. The first part for organisational capital is all about, do we resource our people appropriately? Do we give them the right gear that's well maintained and effective? And are we providing them with good training? Have we got good training systems to give that safety knowledge and skill that they need to be successful? In terms of the social element, it's all about shared mental models and being able to communicate our goals and intentions for the upcoming work. So the importance of having a really cohesive and effectively sort of organised team. And for the human component, we're talking about something called mindful compliance, which is a type of deep compliance, that when we use our procedures and our policies and our tools of safety, we're actually using them in the way that's intended. We're taking our time, we're thinking it through, we're applying that with the idea of reducing risk and not just ticking the box on, we've complied, we've done our bare minimum. And lastly, for the agility dimension of safety capability, the organisational capital is all about communicating about safety effectively downwards in the organisation, so management down to people, and the change management capabilities in terms of managing the safety risks when an organisation engages in change. Psychological safety, or a form of psychological safety, sneaked its way in there in terms of a climate for speaking up about safety. And lastly, it's the last human capital dimension is about preventing mistakes and learning from errors. So we're trying to create a comprehensive framework that covers all bases, I guess, and provides organisations with a framework if they want to change or improve their safety performance. Well, where in this 9 dimensions should we focus our energy efforts, and which ones do we need to kind of prioritise in that matrix? So hopefully over time we'll be building that benchmarking data set and be able to give organisations really targeted, kind of helpful feedback about what they can do to improve. For the psychometric folk among us, there's just a couple of little figures up here. I won't talk too much about it, but the CFAs were quite good, I suppose, in terms of their fit indices. So the long form was 60 items. We had 2 studies where we could run that, and we saw that the fit statistics were quite good. And for the short form, we had even better performance. So that was quite reassuring to say that once we've reduced the scale, we've actually picked the best performing items, and we saw those fit indices improve as a result of our approach and the robustness of how we tackled that particular task. A little bit more numbers now, so I won't labour on this point, but for study 4, we were looking at validity, of course, in terms of conversion and discriminant. So we included a few extra measures: emotional regulation, conscientiousness, and safety climate. So we would expect safety climate to be pretty moderately correlated with this measure. It's including some of the measures that have already been established, some reworded items, but it also conceptually kind of fits with that idea. And indeed, we saw sort of moderate to high correlations there, but still enough to be distinct that we're not sort of measuring the same construct. And likewise, differently for discriminability, emotion regulation, and conscientiousness are rather non-significantly related or only sort of lowly related to our measure of safety capability. So it sort of gives us some confidence or initial preliminary evidence that we are measuring something unique and it's different to the other established constructs that are out there. It's a big table there, so I won't sort of labour on the numbers, but really what we did for study 5 was included a bunch of outcome variables, these ones at the top, so errors and incidents that have happened, self-reported unfortunately, but the best we could get at that stage, and some additional measures that went beyond your traditional physical safety, like job engagement, emotional exhaustion and work efficiency. So for those sort of non-traditional safety metrics, we had significant correlations with job engagement. Emotional exhaustion was negative across the board, and reasonably, I guess, sizable correlations given the small sample size. We had 165 people for this particular study, and work proficiency was also correlated with measures of safety capability measure as well. In terms of the self-reported safety incident data, really just the property incidents and some of the LTIs are correlated with the MOSC dimensions. And from what we could see, some of the proficiency dimensions, which is probably what we might expect, that's probably the most proximally related to incident sort of outcomes, seems to be the most important dimension for predicting outcome variables when it comes to safety. So being proficient, being able to train people well, deploying resources effectively, managing risk and coordinating the work, of course, would be closely related to some of those outcome variables. So in terms of just wrapping up and sort of finishing what I wanted to talk about today, I wanted to describe the ARC linkage that we're hopefully undertaking into the future. So what we, I guess, wanted to do was, now that we've developed some preliminary evidence that this tool works and is sort of psychometrically effective, we want to take that to the next level and start to build a more compelling case that this tool is actually related to safety performance as objectively measured or as measured through various different multiple sources of data. Excuse me. So things like workers' compensation claim data, inspection notices from the regulator, and safety performance measures as rated by maybe a manager or a business owner, not just a self-reported individual measure. One of the limitations of our study up till now is it is all individual level, so it's just an individual in an organisation reporting their perceptions and also reporting their own self-rated performance and outcomes. So quite, I guess, limited in terms of how much we can draw from that in terms of causality. So the linkage grant is really aimed at making this benchmarking data set publicly available so others can compare against it and see where they, how they're going. We also want to test some interventions because in the safety space, and particularly culture and climate, there's not a great deal of really well-designed experimental studies. Dob Zohar's done a bit and his colleagues in that space. But it really, their interventions tend to focus mainly on leadership and communication. Whereas for this project, we want to look at more integrated, holistic interventions. How do we change an entire organisation's ability to be safe by looking at its systems, its way its people interact, and its human capital as well. So it'll be quite an interesting way to explore that. We're partnering with the Office of Industrial Relations on the grant, and the intervention will involve us upskilling their existing sort of advisors, or what we call the IPAM programs, the Injury Prevention and Management Program, to deliver the intervention on our behalf. So it'll be a nice way to transfer some of the knowledge, upskill industry, and also embed that capability into the regulator moving forward. So nice kind of translation piece there. And the last piece of the linkage is looking at the change agents, maybe the unsung heroes in these organisations that are actually on the ground doing all the work. So your health and safety managers or your business owners, if it's a small business. What are some of the factors that might facilitate or impede changes in safety capability? Is it maybe demographic characteristics like the size of the organisation or the resourcing that's available? Or is it more about maybe the individual person factors in terms of their motivation? Their can do, their energy to, their reason to kind of motivations. Is it more, do we have to get the right person and sort of inspire them to do well, to change safety capability? or is it more about maybe the contextual factors that sit around that particular person? So hopefully the project gets up and we'll be able to answer some of these questions. But yeah, I guess that's the presentation today. And really just wanted to open the floor, I guess, firstly to Kirsten in case I missed anything, but happy to take some questions as well if anyone wanted to learn more about the project.